Right, so we have been going through Isaiah for a few years now, and we just completed the section known as Isaiah's little apocalypse from chapter 24 through chapter 27. And for the most part, those chapters were speaking of God's faithfulness to Israel and how despite his judgment of them and despite his dealing with them, that he purifies them through that and that he will bring all things to completion in the end. And chapter 27 had the conclusion, as it were, of the Song of the Vineyard that had been a condemnation to them back in chapter 5. So with all that done, should Israel rest on its laurels? Should Judah rest on her laurels? Should Israel somehow say, oh, well, God's going to sort it all out? So when we come to chapter 28, we begin to deal, really having gone from the future now to the present, and God's plan of salvation for them now. And there's lots of parallels with previous sections. And broadly speaking, this next section of Isaiah is known as the Book of Woes. It begins with the phrase, woe to you, in chapter 28, chapter 29 twice, chapter 30, chapter 31, and chapter 33. It's the Book of Woes. So that's what we're going to kick off tonight. What I'll do is I'll read through the first 13 verses. That's what we're going to try and get covered tonight. And then we'll pray and then we'll study. So let me read through. The proud crown of the drunkards of Ephraim, and the fading flower of its glorious beauty, which is on the head of the rich valley of those overcome with wine. Behold, the Lord has one who is mighty and strong, like a storm of hail, a destroying tempest, like a storm of mighty overflowing waters. He casts down to the earth with his hand. The proud crown of the drunkards of Ephraim will be trodden underfoot, and the fading flower of its glorious beauty, which is on the head of the rich valley, will be like a first ripe fig before the summer. When someone sees it, he swallows it as soon as it is in his hand. In that day, Yahweh of hosts will be a crown of glory, a diadem of beauty to the remnant of his people, and a spirit of justice to him who sits in judgment, and strength to those who turn back the battle at the gate. These also reel with wine and stagger with strong drink. The priest and the prophet reel with strong drink. They are swallowed by wine. They stagger with strong drink. They reel in vision. They stumble in giving judgment. For all tables are full of filthy vomit, with no space left. To whom will he teach to whom will he teach knowledge, and to whom will he explain the message? Those who are weaned from the milk, those taken from the breast. For it is precept upon precept, precept upon precept, line upon line, line upon line, here a little, there a little. For by the people of strange lips and with a foreign tongue, Yahweh will speak to this people, to whom he has said, this is rest, give rest to the weary, and this is repose. Yet they would not hear. The word of Yahweh will be to them, precept upon precept, precept upon precept, line upon line upon line, here a little, there a little, that they may go and fall backwards and be broken and snared and taken. Let's pray. Father, we pray that as we come again to your word tonight, that you would enable us to understand your word and to see what you are saying here in this passage, Lord. And may we be impacted by your word. May we be transformed by your word. And may you be glorified through the teaching of your word tonight. Amen. Amen. Okay, so as I said, having completed the little apocalypse of Isaiah, dealing with the restoration of Israel in the future, chapter 27 ended with the repetition of the promise of the giving of the land to Israel. This was coming at a time after Israel had the broadest amount of land that they had in their history, but still not as much as they were originally promised. And there is a guarantee that that will still happen at some point at the end. And there's so much in chapters 24 through 27 that we see dealt with again in the book of Revelation, hence Isaiah's little apocalypse. So in chapter 28, we now have the book of Woes. And it speaks of the need for Israel to be obedient now. It goes back from the future to the present and all that is going on. And in essence, this section is a second big test for a king. Those of you who've been with us in Isaiah from early on will know that back in chapters 7 through 11 in the book of Emmanuel, which ends with the chapter 12 and the song of Emmanuel, but in 7 to 11 there is the king Ahaz who fails. And King Ahaz is a king who is supposed to, and he's encouraged to, trust in Yahweh, and he doesn't. He trusts in Assyria. But ultimately, in the book of Emmanuel, there is Emmanuel. There is the king who reigns in righteousness. Now we have another king, a king who's going to trust in Egypt this time, another king who's going to fail. But then in chapter 32, there is again a king who reigns. So we'll see a parallel theme here that we saw with Ahaz in the early chapters. And just as before, where the encouragement was not to trust in Assyria, not to trust in any other nations, and we had all the oracles against the nations, the message here is the same. Don't trust in Egypt, trust in Yahweh. This theme of Isaiah is very repetitious. Don't trust in Assyria. Don't trust in Babylon. Don't trust in Tyre. Don't trust in Sidon. Don't trust in Philistia. Don't trust in Egypt. Don't trust in any of them. The church today has to remember the same thing. There are storms that blow through every few years through the world, and then the church gets impacted to some degree. There are storms that come through with disease and virus. There's storms that come through with social issues and things like social justice and what have you. And people who are weak in their faith and are not established on the Word of God are blown to and fro by every wind and wave of doctrine. But for us, we need to be strong and stable. And we need to trust in God, rest in Him, wait for Him, and not get distracted. When Assyria looks strong, we don't trust in Assyria. When Egypt looks strong, we don't trust in Egypt. And when we read the Old Testament, we go, duh, yeah, we're not going to trust in Assyria. But for them, that was a real threat. Assyria was a strong nation. They were attacking and defeating those around them. It was a serious threat. And it seemed reasonable. And the church today continually bows the knee to whatever reasonable doctrine, whatever reasonable compromise is put upon them. That's why I'm so glad that we still have some of you who want to meet in this time. That's why I'm glad that our attendance in the mornings has been increasing, because we need to stand firm. We don't want to fear Assyria or California or Egypt or America. We want to stand before Christ. And so the message for Isaiah not to trust in these nations is the message for us too. I don't want God to ever have to say woe to us. I want us to stand firm. So all of these oracles in this whole new section, it kind of goes from chapter 28 through to chapter 35. It's not quite as in-depth as we had in the previous section, so we'll probably go a little bit quicker than we have been. But these oracles are all linked to a crisis that comes in the 14th year of Hezekiah's reign. Now, if we go back to Ahaz again, he trusts in Assyria. Assyria does exactly what he wants. Assyria takes down Syria, it takes down Israel, the northern kingdom, and Ahaz is like, I'm glad I trusted in Assyria. And then Assyria continues to come down and continues to come down, and eventually takes down Judah as well. The very one that he trusted in is the one that destroys him. And from that point forth, Judah was very much under the control of Assyria. Until we come to the 14th year of the next king after Ahaz, King Hezekiah. In the 14th year, there are those who are pro-Assyrian. Zadok the priest, famously, Isaiah is on this side as well, which might sound surprising, because you say, well, aren't Assyria the bad guys? Well, yeah, they were, because you weren't supposed to trust in them. But when you did trust in them, what happened? God used them. And now you're under Assyrian rule because that is your judgment for not trusting in God. Are you going to learn? Are you going to learn? Well, the other half of the population, right now, they're not pro-Assyrian rule, they're pro-Egyptian. Maybe if we turn to the Egyptians will free us from the Assyrians. And because they're opposed to the Assyrians, it would be easy to think of them as being the team of right. Anybody that encourages compromise amongst God's people are going to do it in such a way that they seem right. But the reality is that the error is exactly the same as the error that they committed previously that led them to be under Assyrian rule. They were trusting in another nation. And so the temptation is to have a revolution and to overthrow the Assyrian rule by turning to the Egyptians. And this was the decision for Hezekiah in the 14th year of his reign. Hezekiah, spoiler alert, he opts against Isaiah, he opts for Egypt, and there is a covenant with Egypt as a result. Now, what we're going to see in these next few chapters is this. Right now in the section we're doing today, we're going to see the northern kingdom of Israel used as an example. That's going to be an introductory section that will kind of lead us in. And then we're going to see the nature of the covenant they make with Egypt and the fruit of that covenant. And the fruit of the covenant with Egypt is going to be devastation in the land, locally. But there is also in these chapters, Isaiah, as he is prone to do, he has a theme and he runs with that theme through various eras and times. And he is also going to look at the time when Israel will make another covenant with somebody else, the one who we know as the Antichrist. And the result of that will also be devastation, but devastation throughout the whole earth. So if you thought we're finished with Revelation, then you're not quite there, because there's plenty more that Isaiah is speaking of, that Revelation again contains very little that is new and that hasn't already been revealed in the Old Testament. So there's all of that to come. And so as we start off the text tonight with all of that introduction, then we're dealing with a judgment on Ephraim. Ephraim was literally one of the sons of Joseph, and the tribe of Ephraim, the descendants of Joseph, took their land in the northern kingdom, and that is representative of the northern kingdom. They are going to be an example for us moving forwards beyond the first 13 verses. So here he is speaking of what has happened with the northern kingdom as an example to the southern kingdom of Judah. Let's have a read through. I don't like this translation. Sounds like you're going to the dentist. It's not quite the same as woe, is it? I think when we hear woe, then we know that there's something not good going on. When we say it could be anything, couldn't it? So I really don't like this modern trend to translate woe as So let me say woe. Woe, the proud crown of the drunkards of Ephraim. This theme of drunkenness is going to come up. I do believe, looking at parallel with Amos 6, that there is indeed a problem with literal drunkenness with the rulers in the northern kingdom. Absolutely. But absolutely, definitively, the drunkenness is also something that is symbolic of their general ruling. There is no rationality, there is no sober-mindedness, very much similar to the false teachers we were talking about this morning in 2 Peter. And so they are proud in the northern kingdom of their crown, but they are just drunkards. the fading flower of its glorious beauty. So the crown of Ephraim, we'll talk about what that is in a minute, is like a fading flower. It was a glorious beauty, but already the flower is starting to wilt. And it is linked to their drunkenness. Well, let's have a look at what then this introductory verse means as he then explains. Behold, the Lord, notice there's no capitals, Adonai, the mighty one, the one who is in charge. Behold, the Lord has one who is mighty and strong. God's boss. He's Adonai, he's Lord, he's master, he's in charge. And he does as he wishes. That's why his name is used here. That's why Adonai is used. It's not Yahweh. It's not his covenant relationship. This is him saying, I'm boss. I do as I wish. And what does he do? He takes one who he has, who is mighty and strong. And the one he has who is mighty and strong is like a storm of hail, a destroying tempest, like a storm of mighty overflowing waters. He casts down to the earth with his hand. The mighty hand of God is bringing a storm. And all this terminology of wind and hail and these sorts of things are being spoken of with regards to the one that God is using. We're going to see here that the one being referred to, who is the one that took down the northern kingdom of Israel? Who is the one that Ahaz trusted in? Remember, Ahaz was threatened in chapter 7 because the northern kingdom of Israel, in coalition with Syria, were gathered against Jerusalem to try and force out the house of David, to force out Ahaz, so that they could put in their own rulers, so that together the three of them, Israel, Syria, and Judah, could stand against the superpower of Assyria. And Ahaz decides, I'm not trusting in Yahweh, I'm trusting in Assyria. I'm going to trust in the actual superpower. And initially, as I said, it worked. And if Ephraim, Israel, the northern kingdom, was overcome by Assyria, was this just something that happened because of what Ahaz had done? Was Israel just some collateral damage in this whole process? No. God had his purposes for Ephraim. God had his purposes for the northern kingdom. And God had this one, Assyria, as a servant, mighty and strong, that was going to become a storm of judgment at the hand of God that was going to come against Ephraim. Notice the repetition in verse 3 from verse 1. The proud crown of the drunkards of Ephraim will be trodden underfoot. So this crown of the northern kingdom is wilting, and now because of their drunkenness again, it's going to be trodden underfoot. The fading flower of its glorious beauty. See, so often we've seen this with Isaiah in the poetic section. He repeats what he's already said and adds a bit of detail. It's not just fading, it's trodden. It's going to be destroyed. So the imagery is something that is fading away anyway, and it's then suddenly trodden down. The idea, if you like, is that because of their drunkenness, they're losing their crown. So God just speeds up the process. That's what's going on here. Now we're told what the crown is, which is on the head of the rich valley, Now we had that in verse 1 as well, and I skimmed it, which is on the head of the rich valley of those overcome with wine. The head of the rich valley. Now the head of the rich valley is literally the hill on the valley. And in the northern kingdom, the pride of the northern kingdom was its capital city, Samaria. Samaria, at the time, we think of it in negative terms in the New Testament, don't we? But at the time, it was the pride of the northern kingdom. And it was mighty. I mean, they thought it was impenetrable for a while. And it stood on a hill in the valley. Now that sounds contradictory, doesn't it? Head of the valley, hill of the valley. How can that be? Well, because what happens is there's a valley with mountains around, and in that valley there's also some hills, and it was on the highest hill in the valley with the mountains around it. So it was a place that was well protected by the mountains and was still in a high place relative to the area directly around it. It was a fantastic location. It still is a fantastic location. And it was a place that they considered to be mighty, impenetrable, and it was at the head of a rich valley. If you want to translate that literally, it's a fat valley, the valley of oil, a place of prosperity, a place of rich food. And because of the rich food, and they have plenty of wine, and they are being killed by their own prosperity. How many nations has that been true of? Greece and Rome and so many others. Do believe that we live in an era now in the Western world where leisure and pleasure have so overtaken us that people just think they can do whatever they want. And the formerly great nations are going to just continue to tumble at the hands of their own immorality. They're fading, 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 fading. Like a flower that once bloomed in glory, these nations will fade away unless God treads them down first. And that often happens, and that happened with the northern kingdom. And this treading down, notice verses 3 and 4, direct repetition of verse 1, with the addition of being trodden down. And this is described in verse 4 as being like a first ripe fig before the summer. When someone sees it, he swallows it as soon as it is in his hand. Okay, this is something that might be complicated to many of you, but is very simple for me because I have a fig tree in my garden. And that makes these analogies really simple. We are now in early August, and early August is important from, or middle of August really, I suppose. August is very important for many things. 2 birthdays in our family, there's that. But also it's when the figs come into season. And we brought a whole bunch of figs last Sunday that got, I thought they'd last forever. They got wolfed down in 5 minutes, but there were plenty of figs. And we have a ton of figs on our tree right now. And when it is peak season for figs, the tree just produces fig after fig after fig after fig. It is ridiculous. Most of them are high up and we can't even get to them, which is frustrating, and they just rot and fall down. But there's plenty of figs that we can get, and they're all on the tree. But what is amazing to me is that before fig season, there is in June a very brief season where a few figs become ripe. And they're just a few. When I first noticed it, we'd already been in the house for a year or two, and Jenny was the one who told me and said, you know, no, we always get a few early, and I didn't even notice it. Because while the main crop of figs is a huge amount, and it goes on for quite a while, it's not a long, long season, but it's there for quite a few weeks, one after the other, there is this early crop that comes in June, which is really brief. And you just got to find a few figs on the tree, and you grab them and you eat them, and there's just a handful, and they're just a little taster, and then they're gone. And it's like, man, figs, this is great. Oh, they're gone. And you have to wait for August for the real crop. There's just a little teaser trailer, if you like, for the upcoming crop of figs. That is what Isaiah is referring to. He's referring to the early season figs, the first ripe figs that come before the summer. He's talking about that June crop. Why is he making a reference to that? Because when someone sees it, he swallows it as soon as it's in his hand. Here's the figs, they're in the tree, boom, gone, done. Not the main crop, just a very quick, brief one. What is the point? The point is that the northern kingdom of Israel was going to be trodden down as swiftly as the first season of figs. Just, they're there, boom, they're gone. So you have a flower that has been in bloom, has been glorious, that is wilting in the midst of their drunkenness, in the midst of their prosperity, in the midst of them taking their prosperity for granted and turning away from God. Their glory fades away and wilts and wilts and wilts so gradually, so imperceptibly, that you can almost really, if you're living in the midst of it, not see the glory of the nation start to fade away. And then when it's weak enough, gone. A nation comes in, boom, gone. And that's what happened to Israel. In that day, Yahweh of hosts. Now notice this. Who is the one who brings in the judgment? Who is the one who authorizes? Who is the one that utilizes the judging of Israel, the northern kingdom, by Assyria? It is Adonai. No capital letters in your Lord in your English Bibles. It is him who is mighty. There is a lack of the covenant name of God. It's speaking about the fact that he's in charge of you, not the fact that he has relationship with you. But now in verse 5 there's a shift. And the shift has gone to the covenant name of God. Why? Because in verse 5 it's speaking of the remnant, the true believers, the minority, but the true minority. In that day, Yahweh of hosts will be a crown of glory, a diadem of beauty to the remnant of his people. And he'll be a spirit of justice to him who sits in judgment, and strength to those who turn back the battle at the gate. Listen, my friends, and listen good. I have become so disappointed by Christians who have not stood by the church in its hour of need. Right now, the government in this state is saying you cannot have your normal church services. And there are Christians saying, oh, well, doesn't matter, not a big deal. We just got to go along with it. I disagree as strongly as one can disagree. And there is here a remnant who in the midst of other religious people, there is a remnant who is true to God. And while there is judgment coming against the nation as a whole, and people are compromising and exposing themselves left, right, and center, the true remnant are exposed because as the flower wilts, they shine. Notice the connection here. There is a fading flower of glorious beauty, and here the remnant are a crown of glory and a diadem of beauty. While the nation fades, it is the time for the true people of God to shine. This is why I have no time for those who have criticized John MacArthur for having church right now. None at all. I'll tell you why. Because when the nation crumbles, he's standing up and he's saying, we will be here for you, we will do church, we will minister, we will proclaim the word of God, we will not be told that we can't. It is an opportunity to shine. And the other day, President Trump picked up the phone and spoke to John MacArthur for 25 minutes after John MacArthur had been on the news channels. Do I believe that Trump is a man of God? Absolutely not. I think there's virtually no chance of him being a redeemed, saved man. I see no evidence of it. But he picked up and spoke to a godly pastor for 25 minutes. Do you think the gospel wasn't preached then? I cannot believe that it would not be. There are opportunities coming up. Now, we're not a church like Grace Community Church. I'm not a John MacArthur. We're not as big or as well known, and we fly under the radar as a result. But I'm glad that there are people like him who are getting onto news channels and standing up, and we will stand beside him though we may not be noticed. And you know why? Because now is our time to shine. Now is our time to say to people around us in the world and the community that God is essential, that church is essential, that we are here, and that we will, though others may compromise and others may back down, we will stand firm. We will stand firm. And we will be here, and we will minister in God's name and in his word. And it's just, to me, the picture here in Isaiah 28 is so applicable to our time. That as the nation around them starts to crumble and fall and then is crushed, though they get caught up in that judgment, it is their opportunity to shine. It is their opportunity to stand for God. For Christians, times of persecution are always glorious times. Let me say that again. Times of persecution are glorious times. Not because we enjoy being eaten by lions, if it ever comes to that again, or being imprisoned, which is more likely to come to, or being fined, which it may well come to, or being kicked out of the country, which it may well come to. We may not like that, but it is our opportunity for us to say, though Assyria gathers around the city, we will trust in Yahweh. And when we do so in the face of adversity, we become his crowning glory. Isn't it amazing that in a passage that speaks of the judgment of Israel, there are these two verses that use the covenant name of God and speak of his remnant and speak of them shining as the previously shining city is brought down. That what they trusted in was brought down, and what mattered begins to shine. Are people going to fall by the wayside? Let them fall. Are institutions going to topple? Let them go. And then those of us who will be faithful will be found to be faithful and will shine. It is our time. We will remain faithful. And so I find verses 5 and 6 just astonishing. We will be a spirit of justice if we sit in judgment. We will be strong in our battle. We will stand because we are the crown of glory and the diadem of beauty of Yahweh of hosts. That is the role of the remnant, the true believing Israel of that day in the midst of the judging of the nation. And that will be the role of the true believers in the judging of the church. Now, verse 7, these also, literally even these, it can be misunderstood to think that you're referring to the same people as the previous two verses, but the Hebrew is in fact emphatic. It's a way of expressing another group of people, a distinct group of people. And so it's not the remnant, it's the previous mentioned. These also, these leaders, these drunkards of Ephraim, they reel with wine, they stagger with strong drink. The priest and the prophet reel with strong drink. They are swallowed by wine. They stagger with strong drink. They reel in vision, and they stumble in giving judgment. Listen, was there a problem with alcoholism in the northern kingdom of Israel? Yes, there literally was. There seems to be the case. Do we think that this is all that he is saying here? No, clearly not. He's talking about how in their prosperity and their enjoying of life, that they don't care about judgment. Do you really think that a court should have been rushed together on a Saturday evening when courts don't meet on Saturdays, purely for the purpose of trying to declare a church service that's been given the go-ahead on Friday to be illegal? What is that communicating? These people in judgment are judging with a lack of sober minds. They're drunken judges. We speak even today of a sober judge, a sober-minded judge. Someone whose judgment is reasonable. Someone who says, well, I would like to say that X is the answer, but the law says it's Y, so I'm going to have to go with Y. I'm going to have to do what is presented before me by the law. I'm going to have to not be swayed by my own desires, my own wants, my own emotions. I need to be sober-minded. And here, the judges are drunk. The prophets are drunk. The priests are drunk. Everybody is doing what gives them pleasure. Everybody is doing. I am sick of politics in this nation. And I mean both sides. I'm sick of people saying, oh, it's the Christians in the Supreme Court, let's rule against them. Oh, it's the Christians in the Supreme Court, let's rule for them. I'm sick of people just ruling for the side they want to rule on, the side that they support, rather than just looking at the law and seeing what the law says. It seems ridiculous to me. They're doing the exact opposite of what judges should do. And that's what's happening in Israel at this time, is that these people are just doing whatever they darn well want to do. They're just getting on with it. They're doing it. They are not ruling with a sober mind. And thus, as much as they like their drink in their prosperous vineyards and their prosperous olive plants, and they're enjoying life, that their whole rule and reign, both in the religious system, the prophets and the priests, and in the civil system, the judges, they are viewed as just being drunks. They're drunks. The whole place is a mess. And continuing that analogy in verse 8, all of their tables are filled with vomit. There's no space left. In other words, their foolish, wicked behavior has taken away their glory gradually. They're not even aware of it. And their bad behavior, their bad thinking, their sinfulness, their desires ruling their heads has affected the entirety of their life. And it's like going to a place where every single table has been thrown upon and there is just vomit everywhere. The effect of their drunkenness is seen everywhere. Sober-minded judges, we have bad rulings here. Sober-minded prophets, we have false prophecy here. Sober-minded priests, we have idolatry over there. There is this compromise everywhere, and every area of life has been vomited on. Isn't that a lovely analogy? Isaiah doesn't mince his words, does he? That was the state of Israel. That was the state of the northern kingdom. That's why Assyria, God's people, his one who was mighty and strong, were going to come in to tear down Israel. In verse 9, there is in verse 9 an interesting expression where these drunken leaders begin to, perceived as drunken leaders, begin to mock Isaiah. And what is interesting is they're mocking him like he's the one who's drunk. Now, isn't this always the case? The people who are talking absolute nonsense and just speaking out of their emotion, they come across someone who is rational and sober-minded, and to them, that person seems drunk. What's wrong with you? And so they mock Isaiah. To whom will he teach knowledge? To whom will he explain the message? Those who are weaned from the milk? Those who are taken from the breast? In other words, who's Isaiah speaking to? Babies? Is he talking to small children who've just been weaned? Is he preaching to a kindergarten? Why are they suggesting that? Well, they tell you what Isaiah's message is here. The translation is almost irrelevant. Some think that the one word means precept, as in order. Order upon order, precept upon precept, precept upon precept, line upon line upon line, here a little, there a little. It's just a way of translating, going blah, 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 gibberish, 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 gibberish. The ones who are drunk think the one that is speaking sense is muttering gibberish. His prophecies are gibberish to them. They make no sense. Boy, is that applicable to our nation today. And look at what is being said here. By the way, the Hebrew, each word is one syllable with little prepositions in between. Tzav l'tzav, tzav l'sav, kav l'kav, kav l'kav. Zayir sham, zayir sham. It's just this ba 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 ba. Sounds like a Pentecostal meeting, doesn't it? And there's a reason I say that, which will become clear at the end of this passage. Okay? I'm not just saying that for the sake of it. So there's a babble, 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 blah, 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 gibberish, gibberish. But the meaning seems to be just command after, here you are, Isaiah. Don't do this, command after command, order after order. Don't do this, don't do that, don't do this, don't do that. Live this way, don't live that way. That's what we sound like to the world. Oh, we can't do this, we can't do that. God doesn't want us to do this, God doesn't want us to be happy. Silly rules here. Look at you Christians, you bigots, not allowing this, not allowing that. Precept upon precept, precept upon precept, line upon line, line upon line. The line here is a line in the sand. It's a case of, oh, you won't do that, you won't go over here. You have to do this, you can't do that. A little bit of this, a little bit of that. They're mocking Isaiah. You're talking nonsense, pal. You're talking silly little gibberish. It's only, you're talking to a child? Are you like a baby going babbling to another child? Is that what you're doing? This is the drunks who think that Isaiah is talking nonsense. Look at the response. For by people of strange lips and a foreign tongue, the Lord will speak to this people. Because they've made this judgment against Isaiah, and by making it against Isaiah, making it against Yahweh and his word through his prophet, the judgment on them will be exactly what they've said. That God's word will seem like gibberish to them. They won't be able to understand. And a foreign nation who speaks gibberish, a foreign nation that they don't understand, will come in and rule over them. For by a people of strange lips, with a foreign tongue, Yahweh will speak to this people. So when the Assyrians come in, so here's Ahaz, remember chapter 7 and on. Ahaz trusted in the Assyrians, and then what happened? The Assyrians, they win, yay! Syria and Israel are down. And here, as Israel goes down, God is using his purpose against Israel, and he takes Israel down by the Assyrians because of their idolatry, their rejection of God's message. And as they take him down, God is speaking through that judging nation. God is speaking to Israel through the Assyrians. So when the Assyrians go, blah, 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 may you please remember that you thought Isaiah was saying, blah, 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 blah. You took my word to be gibberish. Okay, I'll speak to you in gibberish. And when you hear the Assyrian tongue, know that I'm speaking to you, and I'm speaking judgment. That's what's going on here. The Lord will speak to this people, that's to Israel, to whom he has said, this is rest. Give rest to the weary, this is repose. Yet they would not hear. Rest. Do you not want rest? Resting in God. In the book of Hebrews, rest is seen as spiritual maturity. Just that ability to rest in God, to rest in his word, to rest in his promises, to wait on him, to trust in him. Isaiah talks about this theme a lot. We've seen it already. We'll see it more. You're probably familiar with those who renew their strength, those who trust in him, those who wait on him. Waiting on God, trusting in God, resting in God. It's all the same thing. It's saying, though Assyria may come against us, we're not going to fear, we're going to trust in Yahweh. Because he's Yahweh of hosts. He's in control of all armies and all powers and all might. He's the one who controls all things, and so we will trust in him. But they didn't. He told them to, but they didn't. He offered them rest, but they didn't take it. They wouldn't listen. And so, verse 13, the judgment on Israel will be this. The word of Yahweh will be to them, blah, 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 blah. Gibberish. You think Isaiah's words are just rubbish? That's good, because every time my word is spoken, that's all you're going to hear. Book of Romans, not a lot new. Paul speaks about Israel's blindness. Isaiah speaks about it in chapter 6. He speaks about it again here. Israel's blind because they've been judged, because when they could see and they could hear, they rejected it, and now they cannot see and they cannot hear. And so the word to them will be that gibberish, that precept upon precept, line upon line, here a little, there a little. That will be the judgment upon them from a foreign lips, from a foreign tongue, that they may go, sorry, I lost my place. They may go and fall backwards. They may be broken and snared and taken. The go and falling backwards, it's possible, some have suggested, that because part of the context here is they have, the words that they've said concerning Isaiah's message is being used back against them as a judgment. And they suggested, oh, Isaiah, your word is only good for children. So one suggestion, one which I'm quite fond of, I should say, though I'm not 100% convinced, I'm quite open to it, is that them going and falling backwards is the picture of a staggering toddler learning to walk, a child coming, on the breast, just learning how to walk for itself, that, oh, what, you think we're little children? That's all your word's good for, Isaiah. And it's like, well, yep, you are a little child, you need to hear it, because you're going to try and wobble and walk and you're going to fall. It's the humiliation of them. It's the turning of their words back to them. So that kind of makes sense. And then it says they will be broken, they will be snared, and they will be taken. Broken in a sense like against a rock, snared like you would be in a net, and taken as you would be in a trap. That is what Assyria is going to do to them. And indeed, that is what Assyria did to them. And we're kind of jumping in to a historical event, even in the time of Isaiah. Remember, Ahaz trusts in Assyria. Assyria then takes down Israel. And this is the taking down of Israel. Why all of this about the northern kingdom? Because this is going to be the foundation for all that is going to come from verse 14 and following. And there are some absolutely golden verses coming up next time. And so we look forward to that. But we're not done. We're not done. The reason we're not done is because these very verses that we've just seen, this babbling, this precept upon precept, line upon line, repetition, here a little, there a little, is quoted by Paul in 1 Corinthians 14. Let's have a look at that. 1 Corinthians 14. Paul quotes Isaiah 28 in 1 Corinthians 14, where the context is tongues. Blah, 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 blah. Babbling. Okay? Now, this is a really good example of how you have to understand the Old Testament context to know how the New Testament writer is using the Old Testament and the point that they're making in the New Testament. This is a really good example of it. So let's have a look at it. Brothers, do not be children in your thinking. What was the context in Isaiah 28? Those false believers, false teachers, false leaders, the fallen, faded Israel, they were saying, oh, Isaiah's word's only good for children. But they themselves were the one who were toddling and falling. They are the children. So contextually, we're already in Isaiah 28. You can see how Paul's mind works. Do not be children in your thinkings. Be infants in evil, but in your thinking be mature. Oh yeah, Isaiah was a child. He was a child in evil, but he was mature in his thinking. His words were truth. In the law it is written, by people of strange tongues and by the lips of foreigners I will speak to this people, and even then they will not listen to me, says the Lord. Quoting from Isaiah 28, passage we've just seen. Isaiah 28, verse 9. Okay. Verses 11 and 12. So, when we come at this, what is the immediate problem that we see? We've already seen a reference to verse 9 with the children in Isaiah. Now he's quoting directly from Isaiah just a few verses later, verses 11 and 12. What's the problem? Well, the problem I can see very clearly here, in the law it is written. Now, those who were here in the evening services for Mark's Gospel, we saw a similar thing in Mark 1. And what the New Testament writers would occasionally do, they would amalgamate different passages. What he's essentially saying here is Isaiah is telling you what was already said in the law. He's joining all the dots up for you. I believe a good example of what he's speaking of in the law you can find in Deuteronomy 28. You don't need to turn there because I've got it marked up and I'm just going to read it real quick. But Deuteronomy 28 and verse 49 says this. Yahweh will bring a nation against you from far away, from the end of the earth, swooping down like the eagle, a nation whose language you do not understand. A hard-faced nation who shall not respect the old or show mercy to the young. If Israel were to break the covenant, the Mosaic covenant, the old covenant, the conditional covenant, if they were not to keep the laws that God gave them as part of that covenant, then they would be judged and they would be taken from the land, and a nation would come in, a nation specifically whose language they would not understand. That's what the law said. That's why Paul references the law, because though he's quoting not from the law but from the prophet Isaiah, which of course he knew, he's not stupid, this isn't a mistake, this isn't a contradiction, He's simply saying Isaiah 28 isn't new. Isaiah 28 is not anything that's new either. Isaiah 28 is simply taking something that God has promised. That, by the way, is part of the explanation for verses 5 and 6. Why should the remnant be glad in the midst of trials and judgment? Because God's keeping his promises. And what do you know if God keeps his promises, his covenant promises? He's a faithful covenant God. What is God going to do in the last days? He will turn fathers against children and children against fathers. He'll bring judgment on the world. People will abandon the faith. What are we seeing around us? It's exactly what we're seeing. Is it horrible? Yes, it's horrible. Can we rejoice? Yes, we can. Jesus is coming back. And so the law prophesied that this is what God would do to his covenant people. And so there is rejoicing amongst the covenant people who are faithful because God is keeping his promises to the nation. And the promise here is the promise that if they were disobedient to the word, to the law, that God would bring in a foreign nation with a language they could not understand. That was the promise from the law, and that's what Isaiah was referencing, and that's why Paul is quoting Isaiah. So with that said, let's have a look at what Paul is saying. Paul is talking about tongues, okay? He is saying about tongues, in the law it is written, by people of strange tongues and by the lips of foreigners I will speak to this people, and even they will not listen to me, says the Lord. Thus, see the thus? The connection with the quote from Isaiah. The point of Isaiah is about to come up. The reason why he's quoting Isaiah is about to come up. The reason why the principle that goes back to Deuteronomy, that is picked up in Isaiah, is about to be made. This is it. It's coming up. Are you ready for it? Thus, tongues are a sign not for believers, but for unbelievers, while prophecy is a sign not for unbelievers, but for believers. Why are tongues in the church in the first century? The reason they were there was a sign to unbelievers. In the first century church, two things happened very, very quickly. All of the churches pretty much originally were predominantly Jewish. All of the early believers were Jewish. Everybody who was saved at Pentecost was Jewish. It was many years later in Acts chapter 8 that the Samaritans were first allowed to become part of the church. Even the few Samaritans who'd been saved weren't part of the church. They didn't receive the Spirit. They weren't allowed to be part of that church. It took even more time before the Gentiles in Acts chapter 10 could become part of the church. Were there Gentiles who were saved before that? Of course there were. There were always Gentiles saved, going way back in the Old Testament. Remember Rahab? Gentiles get saved. But they never became Israel. And in the same way, in the early church, the church was Jewish. It wasn't Samaritan and it wasn't Gentile. Then the Samaritans got welcomed in by Peter, who had the keys to the kingdom, Matthew 16. And in chapter 10, Peter had the keys to the kingdom, and he is the one who has to allow the Gentiles in. And thus the church becomes this one body made up of both Jew and Gentile. And so the very early church was completely Jewish. And then dramatically, I mean literally in the space of just a few years, churches went from being almost completely Jewish to almost completely Gentile. Israel is blinded. And in that first century church, there is a gift of tongues. And the tongues, the other languages, languages of other nations, are spoken because it is a declaration of other foreign nations, Gentile nations, now being part of the church. And that's not a declaration to the church. It's not for the blessing of the church. It is a statement of the plurality of the church, of the fact that the church is made up of many nations, of Jews and Gentiles, and evermore as time goes through that first century, more and more and more Gentiles. And by the way, that's the whole point of the book of Romans. A church that was almost completely Jewish is now almost completely Gentile. What does that mean for God's promises to Israel? That's what the book of Romans is all about. And here, we see that tongues are a sign to unbelievers. So what does that mean? Well, Isaiah 28 tells us by way of the law, by way of Deuteronomy. Listen, you Jews don't keep my law, what's going to happen? You're going to be ousted from the land, and you will have foreign nations that will come in and take over. Right? And so the physical blessings of the land are going to be in this first generation completely taken away from them. Israel ceased to be a nation and was not a nation for a best part of 1900 years. And so in Isaiah, the judgment is that people of strange tongues will speak to this people. Who's this people? That's Israel. Foreign nations will speak to Israel in a language they don't understand. And who's speaking to Israel? God is. He's speaking his judgment to them. And what Paul is saying is this, that just as the physical nations are going to come in and take away the physical blessings of Israel with foreign tongues, so Israel lose their spiritual blessings for now, as a whole, as a nation. And God will speak judgment to them through the nations that are foreign to them and through languages they don't understand. The gift of tongues in the church in the first century was a statement to unbelieving Israel. These are your blessings. This is what was offered to you. This is your Messiah. This is the blessings of your covenant, and you have rejected it. And now another nation has it, and they speak my word to you, but you can't hear. We, the church, one of our ministries is to speak to an unbelieving Jewish people and to provoke them to jealousy with their Messiah and their covenants and their scriptures. And so the tongues are a sign of Jewish unbelief, a sign to the Jews, because the church is made up of Jews and Gentiles. And the gift of the Holy Spirit, a gift that was promised to the Jews in Joel chapter 2, has been given ahead of time as a spiritual blessing to the entirety of the church, both Jew and Gentile. And one of those gifts is the gift of tongues that the first century Christians used as a sign to say, here's the church. Gentile nations putting you to shame. We believed what you rejected. It's a powerful thing. And I think, although I'm not going to get into it tonight, that's a powerful argument for the discontinuity of tongues outside of the fading away, at least, of tongues after the apostolic era. It's a sign to Jewish unbelievers, but it's a sign that they won't hear or see. In a sense, it's kind of symbolic. But as God makes a sign to them, it's a reminder that he's not done with them. But then, of course, we saw that at the end of chapter 27. So that's Isaiah 28, verses 1 through 13. It's kind of introductory, and it's going to give us a background to the cause of the covenant that they are going to make with Egypt. And we will start to get more into that next time. Let's pray. Father, we thank you for your word. We thank you for your rich ministry of your word towards us. Lord, I'm just so thankful that your word becomes clearer and clearer to us as we rest in you and as we trust in you. May we not be ones to whom it seems gibberish, but may we become to an ever-growing maturity as we study your word. May your word be life to us, and may it be essential to us. And may we be found to be standing on your word at all times, in all places, even in this time right now. Even in the midst of compromise, may we stand on your word. Amen.